Death of the Laird's Jock by Walter Scott, published in 1831. Set in the Scottish Highlands, this historical epistolatory fiction romanticizes the love and honor for one's nation amidst family ties. Do like and subscribe. In the first paragraph of Death of the Laird's Jock, Scott says, "But although sicut pictura poesis is an ancient and undisputed axiom, although poetry and painting both address themselves to the same object of exciting the human imagination, by presenting to it pleasing or sublime images of ideal scenes, yet the one conveying itself through the ears to the understanding, and the other applying itself only to the eyes, the subjects which are best suited to the bard or tale-teller are often totally unfit for painting, where the artist must present in a single glance all that his art has power to tell us. The artist can neither recapitulate the past nor intimate the future. The single now is all which he can present. And hence, unquestionably, many subjects which delight us in poetry, or in narrative, whether real or fictitious, cannot with advantage be transferred to the canvas." Walter Scott is saying that poetry and painting both have the same goal, to make people imagine beautiful or powerful scenes. However, they do it differently. Poetry uses words to create pictures in our minds, while painting shows actual pictures for our eyes to see. Because of this, some things that work well in poetry or stories might not work as well in painting. For example, when a poet or storyteller talks about something, they can take their time explaining it and can describe things that happened in the past or what might happen in the future. But for a painter, they can only show what's happening right now, in one picture. They can't show what happened before or what might happen later. So, some things that are great in poetry or stories might not be good for painting because they need more time to be explained or they involve things that happen over time. So, even though poetry and painting both try to make us imagine beautiful or powerful scenes, they have different ways of doing it, and some things that work in one might not work in the other. In Death of the Laird's Jock, internally, John Armstrong struggles deeply with the loss of a symbolic sword, which represents power, liberty, and Scotland's independence. This loss weighs heavier on him than even the death of his own son, showcasing his fierce patriotism and pride. Armstrong realizes that with his failing health, his son's demise, and the absence of the sword, England's dominance over Scotland is inevitable. His commitment to his country overshadows his familial bonds, portraying him as a dedicated nationalist rather than a loving father. As Armstrong succumbs to his physical ailments, his defiance transforms into a mere outcry of disapproval. But the despairing cry of the aged champion, who saw his country dishonored, and his sword, long the terror of their race, in possession of an Englishman, was heard high above the acclamations of victory. He tossed his arms wildly to heaven, and uttered a cry of indignation, horror, and despair, which, tradition says, was heard to a preternatural distance, and resembled the cry of a dying lion more than a human sound. He acknowledges that with the sword gone, so too is Scotland's hope for a lasting legacy, leaving him more connected to his homeland than to his family. A soldier beholding his son slain, and the honor of his country lost. Armstrong's response, or rather his lack thereof, to his son's death reveals a sense of self-centeredness. His intense desire for war against England is blatant, as shown by his immediate readiness to engage in battle himself when Foster kills his son. The death of his son had no part in his sorrow. If he thought of him at all, it was as the degenerate boy, through whom the honor of his country and clan had been lost. And he died in the course of 3 days, never even mentioning his name, but pouring out unintermitted lamentations for the loss of his noble sword. Armstrong's pride may have hindered his ability to emotionally connect with his family, as his primary concern seems to be Scotland's independence from England. His defiant roar after the altercation serves as a personal affirmation that the conflict between the two nations persists. Despite the deep losses of his son and the symbolic sword, Armstrong's daughter assumes the role of his caretaker, conforming to the gender norms of the time. She is the sole individual capable of mourning the loss of her brother amidst the father's stoicism. His daughter, having done all she could for his accommodation, stood motionless beside him, divided between anxiety for his health, and for the event of the combat to her beloved brother. And while his daughter at once wept for her brother and endeavored to mitigate and soothe the despair of her father, the narrator suggests depicting the flags of Scotland, St. Andrew, and England, St. George, in a painting relevant to the story, potentially reigniting any lingering enmity between Scottish and English people. If it was thought necessary to show more clearly the nature of the conflict, it might be indicated by the pennon of St. George being displayed at one end of the lists, and that of St. Andrew at the other. Scott, like Armstrong, may have shared an intense sense of pride in Scotland. Similar to Armstrong's defiant roar, Scott may believe that despite past defeats, the struggle for Scottish independence must persist. By advocating for artistic representation rather than wielding a sword, Scott employs literature, poetry, and art to further the cause of Scottish independence, stirring the passions of those who still yearn for it. Hope you like, share, and subscribe for more videos.